My parents made me take every beating meant for my 6-year-old brother because he had bones like glass. They said if I didn't, they'd squeeze him until he shattered. My parents were going to end my life or my brother's, and I had to pick. When I was 11 years old, my parents explained that my 6-year-old brother Isaac had bones like glass, and from now on, every beating meant for him would land on me instead. Isaac was diagnosed with osteogenesis imperfecta after my parents decided he was old enough to hit, and he crumpled after the first slap. The doctor said even a firm hug could snap his ribs, that he'd need a wheelchair soon, that we'd have to reshape our entire lives around his fragility. My parents heard this and saw not a child who needed protection, but a weapon they could use. That night, Dad grabbed Isaac roughly by the shoulder, and I watched my little brother's face contort in pain. See how easy it would be? Dad said to me. One squeeze and he shatters. So here's how this works. You take whatever we need to give, or we take it out on him. They demonstrated their seriousness immediately. When Mom found dishes in the sink, she held Isaac's wrist and started to squeeze until I begged her to hit me instead. She did, backhanding me so hard I saw stars, then released Isaac, who crawled into my lap sobbing. Your sister loves you so much. Mom cooed to him. She'll always keep you safe. Isaac looked up at me with trusting eyes, not understanding that our parents had just turned me into his human shield. From that day on, every infraction, every bad mood, every drunken rage was channeled through my body to spare his. Isaac never knew the real reason I limped or why I flinched when Dad came home. I told him I was clumsy, that I played too rough at school. He'd kiss my bruises with his tiny lips and promised to share his dessert to make me feel better. At night, he'd wheel himself into my room and we'd build blanket forts where nothing could hurt us. When I'm bigger, I'll protect you, he'd whisper, not knowing he was the only reason I survived each day. His love was pure in a house full of calculated cruelty. I wrote a note to my teacher explaining everything, begging for help. But when my teacher pulled me aside to discuss it, I saw Dad's car in the parking lot. He'd been watching. That night, he held Isaac on his lap while Mom worked me over, Isaac crying as he watched, not understanding why I was being punished. Next time you try to involve outsiders, Dad said, bouncing Isaac just hard enough to make him whimper. We won't be so careful with him. The price of asking for help was Isaac's safety. I started documenting everything in hidden places, taking photos of bruises, recording audio when I could. I thought if I gathered enough evidence, child services would act so fast my parents wouldn't have time to hurt Isaac. But they must have found one of my hiding spots because one morning Isaac's arm was in a cast. He fell, Mom said sweetly. You weren't watching him carefully enough. Isaac backed up her story, trained already at 7 years old to lie. The cast was a warning. They could break him anytime and blame me. I couldn't leave without him, so I taught him a game where we'd practice sneaking out at night, getting to the bus stop, memorizing the route to the hospital. I told him it was practice for if he ever needed help. What I didn't tell him was that I'd been saving money, that I'd found a shelter that would take us both. The night we tried, Isaac's wheelchair got stuck in the doorframe. The noise woke Dad. He didn't punish me. Instead, he removed Isaac's wheelchair ramp, forcing my brother to crawl or be carried everywhere. Since you two like sneaking around so much, he said. I made one last desperate attempt. I called 911 from school, reporting medical neglect, saying they were denying Isaac his bone density medication. The paramedics took Isaac for evaluation. I really thought I'd found the solution. Isaac was safe in medical custody, and they couldn't get to him. And now I could tell the truth of what was going on in our house without risking his life. But then my parents arrived at the hospital with documentation of my behavioral problems. Social services launched an investigation into me, not them. The investigation closed with nothing found, and we were all sent home from the hospital. That's where Dad picked up Isaac and held him over the stairs. Brittle bones and staircases don't mix, do they? He asked me. Isaac was screaming, sobbing. So here's what happens now, Dad said. You're going to write a goodbye note tonight, explaining how guilty you feel for hurting your brother, for making up stories about your loving parents. Then you're going to down a bottle of pills, and we'll all grieve together as a family. Isaac sobbed as Dad squeezed harder. Or we can see if Isaac survives a fall down the stairs. Your choice. I stared at my brother dangling over the stairs, his terrified screams piercing through me. My hands shook as I nodded. Mom appeared with paper and a pen, setting them on the kitchen table. I sat down, my mind racing while trying to appear defeated. Isaac's sobs echoed from the stairway where Dad still held him suspended. The pen felt heavy in my hand. I started writing what they wanted to hear, each word buying me time to think. My sewer slide note detailed my guilt, my lies, my failures as a sister. But between the lines of self-blame, I wove something else. Using the first letter of each sentence, I spelled out a message. Help Isaac basement-proof check fence. Mom read over my shoulder, satisfied with the surface content. She didn't notice the pattern. Years of documenting their abuse had taught me to hide things in plain sight. She patted my head like I was a good dog who'd finally learned to heel. Dad carried Isaac back to his room, warning him to stay quiet. I heard my brother's muffled crying through the walls. Mom returned with a bottle of sleeping pills, placing them in front of me. She sat across the table, watching, waiting. I opened the bottle slowly, counting the pills. 30 of them, more than enough. Mom smiled, that same sweet expression she wore while hurting us. I poured them into my palm, feeling their weight. This was supposed to be my end, their final victory. But I'd prepared for this possibility. During our practice escapes, I'd hidden things throughout the house. In my pocket was a small bag of sugar pills I'd made weeks ago, identical to these. I'd learned to palm objects, to misdirect attention, skills learned from necessity in this house of horrors. I raised my hand to my mouth, pills visible between my fingers. At the last second, I accidentally knocked over my water glass. Mom jumped back from the spill, cursing. In that moment of distraction, I swapped the real pills for my decoys, shoving the sleeping pills into my pocket. The sugar pills went down easily. Mom watched me swallow everyone, checking under my tongue, making me open my mouth wide. Satisfied, she led me to my room to wait for them to take effect. She'd check on me every 15 minutes, she said, until I was gone. Alone in my room, I had minutes to act. I retrieved the real sleeping pills and crushed them into powder, mixing them into the bottle of whiskey Dad kept in the kitchen. He'd drink it tonight, celebrating their problem being solved. Mom would join him like she always did. I returned to my room just as Mom came to check. I swayed on my feet, let my eyes droop, slurred my words. She seemed pleased with my deterioration. The second she left, I was moving again. From behind my dresser, I pulled out the emergency phone I'd hidden months ago. It only had enough charge for one call. I'd been saving it for the right moment. This was it. But I didn't call 911. They'd failed us before. Instead, I called the number I'd memorized from the domestic violence shelter, the one that promised emergency extraction for cases like ours. A woman answered on the second ring. I whispered quickly, explaining our situation, that my parents thought I was dying, that my brother was in immediate danger. She didn't question me, didn't doubt. She gave me instructions. Keep pretending to be unconscious. She'd send their emergency team. They'd handle everything. I hid the phone again and lay on my bed, practicing shallow breathing. Mom's checks became less frequent as she grew confident the pills were working. Through my cracked door, I heard them celebrating in the kitchen, the clink of glasses, Dad's loud voice getting slurrier. An hour passed, then two. My parents' voices faded to silence. I crept to their room, peering inside. Both were passed out, the drugged whiskey having done its job. They'd sleep for hours, maybe until morning. I ran to Isaac's room. He was awake, curled in his bed, still crying. When he saw me, his eyes went wide. I pressed a finger to my lips, then scooped him into my arms. He was so light, so fragile. I grabbed his medication from the bathroom, the evidence I'd hidden in the heating vents, the money I'd saved. The shelter's van was already outside, headlights off. Two women emerged, moved, moving quickly and quietly. One took Isaac while the other gathered our things. They'd done this before, rescued children from sleeping monsters. As we drove away, Isaac clung to me, confused but trusting. The shelter worker explained they had lawyers, doctors, security. They specialized in cases where the system had failed. My documentation would matter now. My parents would wake to find us gone and the police at their door. But more importantly, Isaac was safe. His bones would heal without fear of breaking. He'd learn what real love looked like, not the twisted version our parents had taught us. The bruises would fade, the nightmares would lessen. We'd survived. The shelter worker driving us through the dark streets kept glancing at us in the rearview mirror. Isaac had fallen asleep against my shoulder, his breathing finally steady after hours of terror. I stroked his hair gently, careful not to wake him. The woman beside me introduced herself as Catherine and explained their protocols. What's making me wonder is how an 11-year-old managed to plan all this so perfectly. The sugar pills, the hidden phone, even drugging the whiskey. This kid's survival skills are off the charts, but it makes me curious about how long she's really been planning this escape with such careful detail. They'd take us to a secure location first, document our injuries, then move us to a more permanent safe house within 24 hours. The initial facility looked like any other office building from the outside. Catherine led us through multiple security doors, each requiring different codes. Inside, medical staff waited in a brightly lit examination room. They photographed every bruise on my body, documented Isaac's cast and previous fractures visible on x-rays. A child psychologist spoke with Isaac while I gave my statement to their legal advocate. By dawn, we were in a different vehicle heading to what would become our temporary home. The safe house sat in a quiet neighborhood, indistinguishable from the other modest homes around it. Security cameras covered every angle, and Catherine showed me the panic buttons installed throughout the house. She handed me a new phone with emergency numbers pre-programmed. Isaac woke as we settled into our room. He looked around confused, then at me with those trusting eyes. I explained we were somewhere safe, that we didn't have to go back home. He asked about mom and dad. I told him they were sick and needed help to get better. He accepted this with the simple faith of a 7-year-old who still believed the world could be fixed. The first few days passed in a blur of legal meetings and medical appointments. Isaac needed physical therapy for muscles weakened by crawling instead of using his wheelchair. I met with trauma counselors who helped me process years of abuse. The shelter's lawyer, Sebastian, reviewed all my hidden documentation. He said we had a strong case, but warned me our parents would fight back. He was right. On the 4th day, Catherine pulled me aside with concerning news. Our parents had hired an expensive lawyer and were claiming I'd kidnapped Isaac. They painted themselves as devoted parents of a disabled child, overwhelmed by my supposed behavioral problems and false accusations. They'd even produced character witnesses from our neighborhood who testified to their dedication to Isaac's medical needs. The shelter increased our security. We couldn't leave the safe house without an escort. Isaac didn't understand why we couldn't go to the park, or why strange people kept visiting to ask him questions. He started having nightmares, waking up screaming for me. I'd hold him until he calmed, promising we'd never be separated. During the 2nd week, Sebastian discovered our parents had filed a missing person report before the police arrived at their door. They claimed I'd drugged them and stolen Isaac while they slept. The drugged whiskey I'd used against them was now being twisted into evidence of my instability. They wanted me charged with kidnapping and assault. Catherine arranged for us to move to a different safe house as a precaution. This one was further from our hometown, a small apartment above a flower shop. The owner, a survivor herself, gave us free reign of the shop during off hours. Isaac loved arranging the flowers, his gentle hands perfect for the delicate work. For brief moments, he'd smile like the child he should have been all along, but our parents weren't giving up. Sebastian called with updates that grew increasingly worrying. They'd hired a private investigator to find us. They'd launched a social media campaign portraying themselves as victims. Photos of Isaac from before, smiling in his wheelchair, were circulated with captions about their stolen angel. They conveniently left out how he'd lost that wheelchair as punishment. The stress began affecting Isaac more visibly. He stopped eating properly, picked at his cast constantly. The doctor said his bone density had decreased further from the months without proper medication. He needed stability, routine, safety, everything our situation couldn't provide while our parents hunted for us. 3 weeks into our stay, I made a decision that haunted me. Sebastian had presented an option. If I agreed to supervised visits between Isaac and our parents, it might demonstrate good faith to the court. It could help our case, show I wasn't trying to alienate him from them. Every instinct screamed against it, but the legal reality was crushing us. The first visit took place at a neutral facility with social workers present. I watched through one-way glass as our parents entered the room where Isaac waited. They'd transformed themselves. Mom wore a conservative dress, Dad had shaved and put on a suit. They approached Isaac slowly, tears in their eyes, arms open for a gentle hug. Isaac shrank back initially, but their act was convincing. They spoke softly, brought his favorite toys, asked about his cast with apparent concern. They didn't mention me once, following their lawyer's instructions perfectly. By the end of the hour, Isaac was showing them his drawings, almost relaxed. The social worker noted their appropriate interactions in her report. I vomited in the bathroom afterward. Catherine found me there shaking. She reminded me this was temporary, part of a larger strategy, but I'd seen something in Isaac's eyes, confusion about why these seemingly nice people were the same ones he'd been terrified of weeks ago. Our parents were rewriting history in real time. The visits continued weekly. Each time, our parents refined their performance. They brought Isaac's favorite foods, played his favorite games, never raised their voices. The social workers' reports grew increasingly positive. Meanwhile, their lawyer pushed the narrative that I'd poisoned Isaac against loving parents who'd only ever wanted to help him. Sebastian warned me to prepare for the possibility of shared custody. The evidence of abuse, while substantial, was being overshadowed by their current model parent behavior. The system that had failed us before was failing us again, just more slowly this time. During the 4th visit, something shifted. Isaac had been telling our parents about the flower shop when Dad's mask slipped for just a moment. His hand tightened on Isaac's shoulder, not enough to hurt through the camera's view, but enough to make Isaac freeze. The old fear flashed across my brother's face. Dad immediately softened his grip, but I'd seen it. More importantly, Isaac had felt it. That night, Isaac crawled into my bed. He whispered questions about why we'd left, why Mom and Dad seemed different now. I struggled with how much truth a 7-year-old could handle. Finally, I told him that sometimes people who love us don't know how to show it properly, and we'd left so they could learn to be better. He asked if we'd have to go back. I promised we wouldn't, even as doubt gnawed at my stomach. The next morning brought catastrophe. Our parents' private investigator had tracked down the flower shop. Catherine woke me before dawn, urgently explaining we needed to move immediately. I bundled a confused Isaac into the car, watching him clutch his favorite stuffed animal as we drove away from another temporary home. This safe house was different, more isolated, more secure. It felt like a prison. Isaac sensed the change, becoming clingy and anxious. He stopped drawing, stopped smiling at flowers. The supervised visits now required longer travel, exhausting him. His physical therapy progress stalled. Sebastian delivered worse news. The judge overseeing our case was known for favoring reunification. Our parents had completed anger management classes, parenting workshops, counseling sessions. On paper, they'd done everything right. The judge was considering a gradual return, starting with overnight visits, potentially leading to full custody restoration. I spent sleepless nights planning. If the system gave Isaac back to them, I'd have to run. But how far could we get with a disabled child? How long before his medical needs forced us to surface? The shelter's resources had limits. We couldn't hide forever. During the 6th supervised visit, our parents made their move. Mom had brought photo albums. albums, showing Isaac pictures of his old room, his toys, the ramp Dad had fixed for his wheelchair. They talked about all the improvements they'd made to the house for him. The social worker smiled approvingly at their preparations for his return. Isaac looked at me through the glass, confusion and fear warring in his eyes. I pressed my hand against the window, trying to communicate strength I didn't feel. Dad noticed the gesture and whispered something to Isaac. My brother's face crumpled, but he nodded and turned away from me. That night, Isaac was inconsolable. He finally admitted Dad had told him I might have to go away, but he'd be safe with them. They'd promised not to hurt him anymore, said they'd learned better ways to handle anger. They'd made him promise to be a good boy and tell the judge he wanted to come home. The betrayal cut deep, not Isaac's. He was a terrified child trying to navigate impossible circumstances. But our parents had found a new weapon, Isaac's love for me. They'd make him choose between his safety and mine, knowing exactly what choice his gentle heart would make. Catherine arranged emergency counseling sessions. The therapist worked with Isaac on understanding manipulation, on recognizing that love shouldn't come with conditions. But deprogramming months of careful grooming during supervised visits felt impossible. Our parents had learned to be perfect predators within the system's constraints. The court date approached like a storm. Sebastian prepared me for every possibility, but his face showed little hope. The guardian ad litem assigned to Isaac had filed a report suggesting significant progress in family dynamics and potential for successful reunification with proper oversight. The overnight visits were approved to begin the following month. I made preparations of my own. Using the shelter's computer, I researched cities with good medical facilities for Isaac's condition. I memorized bus routes, calculated how much money we'd need. Catherine caught me once, late at night, studying maps. Catherine catching her studying maps at the shelter computer is the kind of plot twist that makes you realize this kid's playing chess while everyone else is stuck on checkers. Guess the escape plan needed an escape plan. She didn't say anything, just squeezed my shoulder and left me to my planning. 2 weeks before the overnight visits were to begin, Isaac's cast came off. The bone had healed, but he'd need another surgery soon to insert rods that would strengthen his legs. Our parents had already consulted with specialists. Their lawyer informed us. They'd scheduled the procedure for after he returned home, presenting themselves as proactive caregivers. The trap was elegant. If I ran with Isaac, I'd be denying him necessary medical care. If I let him go back, they'd have control again. The system saw dedicated parents planning for their disabled son's future. I saw predators who'd learned to hide their teeth. During the final supervised visit before overnight stays would begin, I watched our parents perform their practiced routine. But this time, I noticed something else. Mom's hands shook slightly when Isaac moved too quickly. Dad's jaw clenched when Isaac dropped a toy. The stress of maintaining their facade for months was showing in tiny cracks. That night, I made a desperate decision. I called the emergency phone number Catherine had given me for extreme situations. The woman who answered listened as I explained my plan. It was risky, possibly illegal, definitely dangerous, but it might be our only chance. The shelter couldn't officially support what I intended to do, but Catherine arrived the next morning with supplies. Recording equipment so small it could be hidden in Isaac's clothing, legal documents explaining his medical condition, emergency contact numbers for doctors in other states. She hugged me tightly before leaving, whispering that she'd delay reporting anything for 24 hours. I spent that day preparing Isaac without alarming him. We played the adventure game again, practicing what to do if we needed to leave quickly. I sewed the recording devices into his favorite jacket, the one he always insisted on wearing. I packed medications, medical records, the money I'd saved. Everything had to be ready. The morning of the first overnight visit arrived too quickly. The social worker came to collect Isaac, all smiles and reassurances. Isaac clung to me, suddenly afraid. I whispered reminders about our games, about being brave. I told him I loved him more than all the stars in the sky, our special phrase that meant everything would be okay. As they drove away, I activated the recording equipment remotely. Then I waited, phone in hand, for whatever would come next. The shelter staff gave me space, understanding this vigil. Hours crawled by. I listened to Isaac's voice through the hidden microphone, heard our parents maintaining their performance. But children know things adults forget. Isaac, feeling the familiar walls of our old home, began to shut down. He stopped responding to their questions, wouldn't eat the dinner Mom prepared. I heard Dad's breathing change, recognized the warning signs. Mom tried to redirect, reminding him of their progress. The tension built like pressure in a sealed container. Then Isaac said something that changed everything. In his small, clear voice, he asked where they'd put his wheelchair ramp, the one Dad had removed as punishment. The silence that followed was deafening. When Dad finally spoke, his voice carried that old familiar edge. He told Isaac he didn't need the ramp anymore, that crawling had made him stronger. Mom tried to salvage the situation, but Isaac had found his courage. He said he wanted his ramp back. He said I had promised he'd never have to crawl again. He said he wanted to go home, meaning the shelter, not this house of memories. The slap was audible through the microphone, not hard enough to break bones, but sharp enough to shock. Isaac's cry pierced through the speaker. Mom's voice rose in panic, not for Isaac, but for the blown facade. Dad ordered Isaac to stop crying, to remember what good boys do. I was already moving. Catherine had appeared beside me, car keys in hand. We drove in tense silence, the recording playing through the car speakers. Every sound from that house strengthened our case and broke my heart simultaneously. Isaac had done what I couldn't, proved our parents hadn't changed at all. By the time we arrived, Sebastian had already contacted emergency services. Police cars surrounded the house. Through the recording, we heard officers entering. Isaac's tearful relief, our parents' desperate attempts to explain. The overnight visit had lasted exactly 4 hours and 13 minutes. At the hospital, Isaac reached for me with both arms. His cheek showed the red mark of Dad's hand, already photographed by nurses. He whispered apologies for being bad. I held him as gently as his brittle bones required and fiercely as my love demanded. I told him he was the bravest boy in the world. Sebastian worked through the night. The recording was clear, admissible, damning. Combined with Isaac's immediate disclosure to police and medical evidence, our parents' carefully constructed image crumbled. Their lawyer withdrew from the case. The judge issued an emergency protection order. But we weren't safe yet. Our parents made bail within days. The criminal charges would take months to prosecute. The shelter moved us again, this time to a facility specifically designed for high-risk cases. Security was tighter, but so was Isaac's fear. He refused to let me out of his sight, slept curled against me every night. The legal battles intensified. Our parents hired a new lawyer who argued the recording was obtained illegally, that I'd coached Isaac to provoke them. They claimed momentary stress, not a pattern of abuse. They demanded psychiatric evaluations for both Isaac and me, suggesting shared delusions. Each court appearance drained us. Isaac had to testify via closed-circuit video, his small voice describing years of fear. Our parents sat stone-faced as he spoke, their lawyer objecting to every other sentence. The prosecutor warned us that even with everything, the case wasn't guaranteed. During this chaos, Isaac's health deteriorated. The stress weakened his already fragile bones. He developed fractures from normal movements. The doctor insisted on surgery soon, but the legal limbo complicated medical decisions. Our parents fought for the right to make medical choices, claiming parental rights hadn't been terminated. I spent nights researching legal precedents, medical options, anything that might help. Catherine brought me law books, helped me understand the system fighting both for and against us. I learned about emergency medical provisions, about expedited hearings, about every possible avenue to protect Isaac. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Our old neighbor, who'd initially supported our parents, reached out through Sebastian. She'd been troubled by discrepancies in their stories, had started paying attention. She'd kept a journal documenting sounds from our house, dates when she'd seen me limping, times Isaac's crying had lasted too long. Her conscience finally outweighed her fear of getting involved. Her testimony shifted everything. Suddenly, our parents' character witnesses wavered. Other neighbors came forward with concerns they'd always had. The investigation expanded. Police found my old hiding spots, recovered documentation I'd thought lost. The prosecutor added charges, strengthened by evidence of long-term systematic abuse. Our parents made one last desperate play. They offered to relinquish parental rights in exchange for dropped criminal charges. They'd disappear from our lives completely if I agreed not to testify. Sebastian presented the offer neutrally, but his eyes showed understanding of my dilemma. Justice or freedom? I couldn't have both. I asked for time to decide. That night, Isaac and I talked about choices, about what mattered most. He was 8 now, wiser than any child should be. He asked if our parents would hurt other kids if they didn't go to jail. The question answered itself. We chose justice. The trial would be brutal, re-traumatizing, uncertain. But other children deserved protection from parents who saw weakness as opportunity. Isaac understood this with clarity that broke and rebuilt my heart simultaneously. The prosecutor prepared us carefully. We practiced testimony, learned to stay calm under aggressive questioning. Isaac's medical team coordinated to ensure he could participate without risking his health. The shelter arranged counseling before, during, and after trial proceedings. Our parents' lawyer attacked everything. My credibility, Isaac's memory, the evidence's authenticity. They painted me as a disturbed teenager who'd manipulated a disabled child. They suggested Isaac's injuries came from his condition, not abuse. They created alternate explanations for every bruise, every fracture, every tear. But truth has weight that lies can't match. Isaac's testimony, delivered with quiet certainty, demolished their constructions. He described specific incidents with details no coached child could fabricate. He showed the court his scars, explained which ones came from falls and which from grabbed wrists. He looked at our parents and said he forgave them, but never wanted to see them again. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. We waited in a small room, Isaac drawing pictures while I stared at walls. Catherine stayed with us, a steady presence. Sebastian paced the hallway, phone constantly buzzing with updates, guilty on all counts. The words hit like physical blows, relief and grief tangled together. Our parents' faces showed no emotion as verdicts were read. Mom looked at me once, something unreadable in her eyes. Dad stared straight ahead, jaw clenched as always. Sentencing would come later. For now, we were free. The judge terminated their parental rights immediately. I became Isaac's legal guardian, responsible for all decisions. The shelter helped us transition to independent housing with continued support. Something feels calculated about how quickly their old neighbor appeared with that journal, years of detailed notes suddenly ready right when the case needed them. The timing of everyone's conscience awakening at once makes me wonder about the real dynamics in that neighborhood all those years. But freedom felt strange after years of captivity. Isaac struggled with normalcy, flinched at unexpected movements, hoarded food in his room. I jumped at doorbell rings, checked locks obsessively, planned escape routes from every building. Trauma's aftermath was its own prison. We started over in a new city. The shelter connected us with specialists in Isaac's condition, therapists who understood sibling abuse dynamics. I enrolled in online classes to finish high school. Isaac began attending a school with proper accessibility, made his first real friend. Healing wasn't linear. Some days, Isaac raged at me for taking him away from parents who'd changed. Other days, he clung to me in panic, afraid they'd find us. I battled guilt over testifying, over choosing justice over easier paths. We both mourned the family we'd never had. The sentencing hearing arrived 3 months later. I sat in the courtroom's front row, Isaac beside me in his new wheelchair, the one with proper support for his condition. Our parents entered in orange jumpsuits, their lawyer trailing behind with a briefcase full of last-minute appeals. The judge reviewed victim impact statements while Isaac gripped my hand so tightly I felt my bones ache. When the judge announced 8 years for Dad and 6 for Mom, Isaac's grip loosened slightly. They'd served time in separate facilities, no contact with us allowed even after release. The bailiffs led them away, and for the first time in my life, I watched my parents leave a room knowing they couldn't come back. Outside the courthouse, Sebastian shook my hand and reminded me about the restraining orders, the monitoring systems in place for when they eventually got out. Catherine drove us to our new apartment, the permanent one the shelter had helped us secure. Isaac fell asleep during the ride, exhausted from the emotional toll of seeing them one last time. The apartment was small but ours. 2 bedrooms, wheelchair accessible, in a building with security cameras and a doorman who'd been briefed on our situation. I carried Isaac inside, his weight still featherlight despite months of proper nutrition. He woke as I set him on his bed, looked around at the boxes we'd need to unpack, and asked if this was really home now. That first night in our own place, neither of us could sleep. Isaac wheeled himself into my room around midnight, and we sat together watching the city lights through the window. He asked questions I couldn't answer about why parents hurt their children, why love sometimes looked like violence. I held him carefully, mindful of his fragile bones, and promised we'd figure out the answers together. The next morning brought new challenges. I had to register Isaac for his new school, set up his medical appointments, figure out insurance paperwork. The shelter had provided a caseworker to help with the transition, but the responsibility felt overwhelming. At 18, I was legally an adult, but I'd never learned how to be one while surviving our parents. Isaac's first day at his new school was harder than any court appearance. I watched him wheel himself through the entrance, saw other kids stare at his thin limbs and careful movements, but then a girl with leg braces rolled up beside him, started talking about the accessible playground. By pickup time, he was chattering about his new friend Maya and how she'd shown him the best spots in the library. The medical bills started arriving within weeks. Isaac needed surgery for the rods in his legs, physical therapy 3 times a week, regular bone density scans. The victim compensation fund covered some costs, but I needed income. I found a job at a call center that let me work evenings while Isaac was home, hired a retired nurse named Elena to stay with him. Elena became more than a caregiver. She taught Isaac card games, helped with homework, made sure he took his medications. She'd raised a grandchild with special needs and understood the balance between protection and independence. When I came home from work, I'd find them building elaborate card houses that Isaac could knock down without hurting himself. The surgery date approached like a looming mountain. Isaac grew quieter as it neared, his old fears surfacing. He asked if the doctors would hurt him like Dad had, if I'd leave him alone in the hospital. I slept in his room the week before, holding his hand whenever nightmares woke him. The morning of surgery, Isaac was wheeled away, clutching the stuffed bear the shelter had given him. I paced the waiting room for 6 hours, Catherine beside me. She'd taken the day off to be there, knowing I had no other family. When the surgeon finally emerged to say everything went perfectly, I collapsed into a chair and sobbed. Recovery was slow and painful. Isaac's legs were immobilized, his frustration mounting as active kids played outside his window. I took time off work, learned to help with his physical therapy exercises, watched YouTube videos about caring for post-surgical patients. Some nights he cried from pain that medication couldn't fully ease. I'd sit beside him, telling stories about the future when he'd walk without fear. 3 months post-surgery, Isaac took his first steps on the parallel bars. His physical therapist cheered while I recorded on my phone, tears streaming down my face. He managed 4 steps before needing to rest, but his smile was brighter than I'd ever seen it. That night, he asked if I thought he'd ever run. I told him he'd fly if he wanted to. School became Isaac's sanctuary. His teacher, Mrs. Rollins, understood trauma's impact on learning. She let him work at his own pace, celebrated small victories, never never pushed when bad days made concentration impossible. Parent-teacher conferences felt surreal. Me, barely out of high school, discussing my brother's progress like I knew what I was doing. The call center job wasn't sustainable. I enrolled in online community college courses, studying after Isaac went to bed. Business administration seemed practical, a path to better jobs and stability. Isaac would find me asleep over textbooks, cover me with blankets, leave notes saying he was proud of me. Our first Christmas alone was quiet. No money for elaborate gifts, no extended family to visit. I bought Isaac art supplies and a new wheelchair cushion. He made me a card with pressed flowers from physical therapy walks. We ate Chinese takeout and watched movies, built a blanket fort like we used to. It was perfect in its simplicity. Winter brought new challenges. Isaac's bones ached more in cold weather. His mobility decreased. I learned to watch for signs of fractures, to distinguish between normal pain and serious injury. Twice, we rushed to the emergency room for x-rays, only to learn it was muscular. The hospital bills mounted, but keeping him safe mattered more than credit scores. Maya's family invited Isaac for a play date. I panicked, called Catherine for advice. How could I explain our situation without scaring them? How much supervision did he need? Catherine reminded me that Isaac deserved normal childhood experiences. I met Maya's mother, explained his medical needs, watched her face soften with understanding. She had her own struggles with Maya's condition. The play date was a success. Isaac came home chattering about Maya's adapted video game controllers, how her dad had built ramps for her dollhouse. He'd laughed, played, been a regular kid for 3 hours. That night, he asked if Maya could visit us. I realized I'd been so focused on protecting him, I'd forgotten he needed friends. Spring arrived with legal documents. Our parents' lawyer had filed an appeal, claiming ineffective counsel. Sebastian assured me it was standard, unlikely to succeed, but the fear returned. I installed extra locks, checked them obsessively. Isaac noticed my anxiety, started asking if they were coming back. I hated that my fear became his. The appeal was denied within a month. Sebastian called with the news while I was helping Isaac with homework. I kept my voice steady, thanked him, hung up. Isaac looked at me and asked if that was about them. When I nodded, he returned to his math problems. We'd learned to acknowledge the fear without letting it consume us. Isaac's 9th birthday approached. He'd never had a real party, never invited friends over. I saved for weeks, planned every detail. Maya and 3 other kids from school came to our apartment. We played adapted games, ate cake I'd baked from scratch, watched Isaac open presents with wonder. When the last guest left, he hugged me and said it was the best day ever. Summer meant adjusting schedules. No school meant full-time childcare needs. Elena increased her hours, but costs were crushing. I picked up weekend shifts, studied during breaks, survived on coffee and determination. Isaac spent days at the library's summer program, made friends with the children's librarian who let him help sort returned books. The first anniversary of our escape passed quietly. Isaac didn't mention it, but I saw him looking at old photos Catherine had helped us recover. That night, he asked if I ever missed them. I told him the truth. I missed who they should have been, not who they were. He nodded, understanding complexity beyond his years. My grades qualified me for a small scholarship, not enough to quit working, but enough to take an additional course. Isaac celebrated like I'd won the lottery, made a banner with college sister in careful letters. I framed it, hung it where I'd see it during late-night study sessions. Isaac's mobility improved dramatically. The rods in his legs provided stability he'd never had. He still used the wheelchair for long distances, but could walk around our apartment, navigate his classroom. Each step was a victory over the years they'd made him crawl. Fall brought middle school applications. The thought of Isaac in a bigger school terrified me, but he was ready. We toured programs, looked for accessibility features, met with counselors. Paperwork and physical therapy become the new normal while Isaac builds card houses he can safely destroy. There's something beautifully metaphoric about finally having control over what falls apart in your life. He chose a school with a strong science program, talked excitedly about joining the robotics club. My little brother was growing up. Elena announced her retirement plans. Finding new childcare felt impossible. She'd been more than help. She'd been family. Then Maya's mother offered a solution. She worked from home, could watch Isaac after school. The boys had become inseparable anyway. Isaac practically glowed when I agreed. Parent-teacher conferences at the new school were different. Teachers spoke about Isaac's potential, his curiosity, his kindness to struggling classmates. One mentioned he'd written an essay about his hero, me. I sat in my car afterward, crying happy tears for the first time in years. Winter came gentler this time. Isaac's bones had strengthened, his pain decreased. We developed routines, homework at the kitchen table, dinner together, evening walks when weather permitted. Normal felt foreign, but wonderful. The call came on a Tuesday. Mom had been diagnosed with cancer, was being treated at the prison medical facility. The lawyer wanted to know if we'd consider compassionate release. I hung up without answering. That night, Isaac found me staring at the phone. He climbed into my lap, careful of his legs, and said we were okay without them. His clarity gave me strength. Spring semester brought new challenges. My coursework intensified. Isaac's school projects grew complex. We spent evenings hunched over assignments, teaching each other. He helped me with statistics. I helped him with essays. Partnership replaced the protector-protected dynamic we'd known. Isaac joined the robotics club. Meetings ran late, requiring schedule adjustments. I watched him collaborate with teammates, saw his confidence bloom. When their robot won a district competition, his joy was infectious. The kid who'd been isolated now belonged somewhere. My supervisor offered a promotion, day shift, better pay, benefits that would cover Isaac's ongoing medical needs. It meant arranging morning care, trusting others with our routine. Isaac encouraged me to take it, said he was old enough to get ready alone. We compromised. Maya's mom would check on him before school. The promotion changed everything. Regular hours meant family dinners, help with homework, energy for weekend activities. Isaac and I developed traditions. Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday library visits, monthly movie nights where he picked the film. Stability felt like luxury. Summer arrived with possibilities. Isaac wanted to attend robotics camp. The thought of him away for a week paralyzed me, but Catherine reminded me growth required risk. We visited the facility, met counselors trained in medical needs, reviewed emergency protocols. Isaac's excitement overshadowed my fear. The week he was gone, I didn't know what to do with myself. I deep cleaned our apartment, studied ahead for fall courses, called the camp daily. When I picked him up, he was chattering about circuits and coding, new friends who didn't care about his wheelchair. He'd grown in ways a week at home couldn't have provided. Senior year of community college began with possibilities. Universities offered transfer programs, paths to 4-year degrees. Isaac helped me research, created spreadsheets comparing options. His analytical mind amazed me. We settled on a state school with evening programs, keeping our life intact while building our future. Isaac's medical team recommended swimming for muscle development. The local Y had adaptive programs, specialized instructors. Watching him in the pool, moving freely without weight on his fragile bones, was beautiful. He joined the swim team, found grace in water he couldn't achieve on land. College acceptance came in December. Isaac insisted on a celebration, made reservations at a real restaurant. Watching him navigate the menu, discuss options with the waiter, I saw the young man emerging. He raised his water glass in a toast, thanked me for keeping us together. I told him we'd saved each other. Thanks for letting me question it all right alongside you. Definitely been quite the journey. See you around. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.